Is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And that is me. Welcome to this Hump Day version of the Kentucky's Voice. Well, we can't just say radio now because we're doing TV as well. What time's that? Somebody maybe in the back room can tell me what time that airs. Like 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. You can watch us at 4 o'clock. You can listen to us at 11 o'clock live, and then watch us at 4 o'clock on WBNA 21 here in Louisville. And this is Kentucky's Voice, radio and TV. Welcome to the program today. It seems like forever since I've been here. I was out last week with various events. I'm going to talk a little bit about one or two of those things that I participated in today. I was not taking time off. I was just working on different projects, speaking. I was with the Louisville Forum. I was on their panel on Wednesday about Medicaid and whether the proposed reforms will help or heal. And I have a theory on why they'll do both and why we need to understand that. So maybe we'll get to that today. Also coming up today, we're going to be joined by Vladimir Aguilar, who is host of The Cuban Show, about the recently proclaimed Cuban Day in Kentucky. And what I'm finding out, folks, is that the Cuban community here is conservative, and Vladimir is, of course, the host of The Cuban Show, and you can watch him here on this wonderful platform, Kentucky's Voice, as well. But we're going to talk to him about not only about what Cuban Day in Kentucky is, but what his assessment of how the president is doing with his immigration policies. And we're going to be talking about a new organization that he started, the Cuban American Conservative Coalition. And I think some of these ideas are going to be repeated nationwide or in other cities. So that'll be an exciting conversation today, coming up in our second segment. But first, I think we would be remiss if we did not mention, and I wanted to mention, maybe the other hosts have, I hope so. I haven't had a chance to catch up on all the programs. I will, but what about these storms? I mean, I guess having been as close as I was to and being in Bowling Green in December of 2021 when the tornadoes hit, some of the worst in the history of our Commonwealth, and in fact, ranking up there in the history of our country, as a matter of fact, that bad. And a young person killed, thrown out into a field, people losing their lives, losing their homes, and we've been hit again, folks. Multiple tornadoes confirmed for what happened last Friday. Severe storms, devastating communities. An EF3 tornado ripped through Russell, Pulaski, and Laurel counties out in eastern, southeast/southeast Kentucky, resulting in significant damage and fatalities. 19 deaths, at least so far, have been reported across the state due to the tornadoes. There are a couple of people still in critical condition. Many others were injured to some extent. I was looking at the list of folks who had lost their lives, and there was an emergency worker, an EMT worker, a first responder possibly, who was found in a field, and he had shielded his wife from and had kept her alive, although she is in critical condition. And young people, old people, middle-aged people, older people, these storms don't discriminate. They don't pick and choose. It's whatever's in their path. And if you saw the path, it was almost like a seesaw path, a sowing path, if you will, down through Laurel County and down through that area. You can just, and Somerset, just one of my favorite areas of the state, got hit very hard. My friend down there, Mayor Keck, and his family, I hope they're okay. But it's a tough job for public officials in those situations as well. But I think overall, all the way from our governor to the mayors to county judges here in Kentucky, I have to say, I think our local and state leadership does well in this area. And perhaps we criticize them, and we rightfully criticize them for some of their nonsense politically and policy-wise, but I think we need to give kudos where it's due, where kudos are due. And I think our governor and our local leaders have done all they can do to try to get aid to these communities, federal aid that's available, and that's what it's for. If that's what it's for, that's what it should be used for. And there's no sense letting the grass grow and waiting forever to get that. So I think our governor has done a good job. He talked about the job that FEMA has done and the good job they've done. So believe it or not, folks, it's still possible for politicians from both parties to work together. Yes, it is possible. I know it is a miracle, but miracles are still possible. We believe in miracles here, and we have seen that with perhaps more than any other situation with these storms and with a lot of the natural disasters. And our governor said, I think he had been part of maybe 19 natural disaster declarations in some form since he's been governor for, 5-6 years. So we've had our share. Flooding, tornadoes, cold, weather, winter weather. I'm done with it all, aren't you? But before we leave this, we need to keep the folks in who've been devastated by this storm, by these tornadoes. We need to keep them in our prayers and thoughts. I don't want that to sound empty. I'm serious about that. I think that a lot of times when something happens, I think initially people are engaged, and I think they do mean well, but they forget. They get busy with other things. But try to add these folks to your prayer list, because there's a lot of folks who've lost pretty much everything, including some family members. There were young people killed, just very tragic. So keep them in your prayers. I found it interesting that the Herald Leader of all publications, with their leftist views on their editorial page and their anti-Christian sentiment many times, but they carried a wonderful story about this. So kudos where kudos are due. And the headline was Pastors Explain, Where Was God When Tornadoes Hit Kentucky? So I know this isn't a Christian program per se, but we've branded Kentucky's Voice as being Christian when it's involved in the conversation, as well as being conservative and common sense. And if it's not involved in this conversation, I don't know where or when it would be. But Sean Ryan, a London, Kentucky pastor, I'm not even sure what church he's with there. Doesn't really matter. He's a Christian. He's serving the Lord there. He's ministering to his people, and his title of his message was, God, Where Are You? And he said he asked his congregation that aloud on Sunday. He said Saturday morning, once the extent of the damage was known, Ryan said he felt gratitude that his home wasn't damaged, gratitude that the church remained unscathed. He felt blessed, he said, but why would God bless him and not others? If you spared me, but you didn't spare them, where were you in this? Ryan shouted from the pulpit. God, what are you up to? What are you doing? And why can't you fix this? Ryan said he doesn't ascribe to the belief that God punishes bad behavior by causing bad things to happen, nor does he believe in attributing tragic death as, quote, being in God's plan, end quote. Rather, he said, and I love this, he said, quote, to love our sinful world is to suffer. To love someone is to suffer. If God is love, that is why he suffers, he said. And it turns out God is right there with us. One of the other sermons, this was from Slate Hill Baptist Church, by the way, one of the oldest churches in Kentucky, one of the oldest in Laurel County, and as well. And they weren't even able to meet in their church because the roof had been torn off by the storms. But it said all around where that church got hit, the tornado's path was visible, trees uprooted, snapped in half, in some cases tossed across the road. And Sunday morning work crews had slowed traffic on the road in order to continue cutting through trees to restore impacted power lines. The pastor, Williams, had originally planned to preach a sermon called Don't Worry, Be Happy. That was going to be his sermon. But once he learned the extent of the damage to not only his church but the community, he questioned whether that was the message his congregation needed. Quote, when I came up here yesterday, I was wrestling with whether I need to do another sermon for this disaster, Williams said in front of his church on Sunday. And I felt the Holy Spirit say, no, I gave you that sermon for a reason. He knew this was going to happen. He said, God knows everything. He preached from the Gospel of Matthew 6:25 through 27, where it says that God will take care of you. He said he knows on the heels of the beastly storms Friday and Saturday, some may question their faith and God's presence. But Williams said, we never know why things happen, but we just know that God is in control no matter what. And I thought that was worth mentioning. And back at, it was First United Methodist, Pastor Ryan, the first pastor I mentioned, said, so you say, God, where are you? The truth is, I believe where God is under the pile of houses out at Sunshine Hill. God is in the trailer park that's been torn to pieces. God's on the street where the houses have no roofs. God's in the intensive care unit where people are being treated for serious injury. His voice cracking, Ryan said, God is there with the people, searching for their families, their pets, their heirlooms. You know, maybe today you're not going through a tornado, but you're going through some kind of storm. Those are really great thoughts from some of the great pastors in our state and great messages they had at timely moments. Those are the times that people need God and need to hear the word of God. And thank God we've got pastors who will deliver that. So coming up, this is Kentucky's Voice. We'll talk with Vladimir Aguilar, host of the Cuban Show, about some events going on here. Cuban Day in Kentucky. Can't wait to hear about that. Later on, we'll talk about Medicaid reforms. Are they going to help or heal? And don't go away. This is Kentucky's Voice. Glad to have you with us today. Thanks for making us part of your day. Don't go away. Stay with us.
To Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice here on this Wednesday edition, Hump Day. Hump Day. Hey, if you can't find anything else good about this day, it's Hump Day, and we're on with Kentucky's Voice. There's two good things right there. We've got another good thing coming up here. Recently, we had Cuba Day in Kentucky, and here to talk about that and a whole lot of other things, I hope, is our friend Vladimir Aguilar, who is the host of the Cuban Show. And Vladimir, there you are, looking ready to go, sunshiny, positive. You've got a glow about you today, brother. We appreciate you being on the program. And when does your show air? Tell us when that airs so that folks can check it out.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here again with you, Jim, and thank you for the invitation. The Q&A show goes to the live air like Mondays, Wednesday, and Fridays, 8 o'clock, like Eastern time in Kentucky.
And where can people watch that at?
They can just go regular, like all the social media platforms like
Very good.
X, which is the former Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook.
Very good. Well, Vladimir, we're so big fans of yours, and we appreciate having this relationship where we can talk to someone with your perspective from the Cuban community. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with the Cuban community here in Louisville, and then what you're seeing across the nation. You know, I'm always amazed at how different the perspectives of certain groups are within our country, and if you talk about groups of people who've migrated here, the Cuban community seems to have a pretty conservative perspective overall. Am I reading that right? Why is that so different than some of the other groups that we have here? Have just a different opposite view. What do you think? What's your theory on that?
Well, first, no one like Cubans to know what's going on with the socialists and communists. So we came from there. We flipped Cuba.
You experienced it, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Firsthand experience. Mm-hmm. So, and actually, there's a lot of like debates right now in the Cuban community about that, because once we left Cuba, now we are watching here in the States the same kind of like the same forces from the socialists trying to infiltrate the American society. And of course, we don't want to get to the point that we need to leave the United States trying to flee the communists. So that's why the Cubans are most like...
Yeah. What is there about what you're seeing? What is it that most concerns you? If you had to choose one or two things, what is that pattern that you see that we moved more in the direction of socialism, away from freedom, and allowed that to erode? What are the areas that you notice that the most in?
Well, I'll say the educational system is the most attacked. I'll say part of the society. Because of course, when you indoctrinate someone on the socialist ideology, at some point that person will be the politicians and the people who are going to run the society. So that's where that's the main target of the socialist ideology.
Mm-hmm. Well, Vladimir, tell us about Cuban Day in Kentucky. What is this about, and how did this idea come about? What's the purpose of it?
Well, the Cuba Day in Kentucky is based on the foundational day of Cuba as a republic, May the 20th in 1902. As you know, Cuba was part of the America, of the United States, between the war they had with the Spanish. And Theodore Roosevelt, the president, back in that time, he granted to Cuba full independence. Then that was when Cuba born, May 20, 1902. Of course, the Castro's tyranny, they don't want that date goes that relevant on the community. But of course, we have to go back to the conservative and Republican principles of our republic. So that's why I was talking to a few friends in Frankfurt, Candy Maseroni, which is like a good friend of the Cuban community. And she said, okay, let's make this official. And then she works on a resolution to make the Cuba Day official in Kentucky, May the 20th.
Well, that's great. And is this going to happen? As we see similar things happening around the country, right, in some other cities and places.
Yes.
And but talk about Louisville here for a moment, too, about the Cuban community here. I wanted to get you to kind of give us an update on what's happening here in Louisville with the growth of the Cuban community. It seems like it's growing rapidly here.
Yes.
And is that still the case? I know it was at one time. Yeah, it was growing rapidly, but is that still the case? And why do you think that's happening here compared maybe to some areas geographically that would be closer to Cuba. Why are we?
Yeah, like Miami.
Yeah, exactly. Why is that happening here? What are your thoughts about that? From you're plugged into the community. What do you hear? What are you told about that?
Well, first of all, like cost of life is really cheaper here than Miami, and
Hmm.
there's more chances to have like a job here in Kentucky that being in Miami. But also, I'll say there is a plan behind all of this for the I'll say the globalist uh, elites about the immigration. The immigration has been like a main key for many governments to try to destroy United States from the inside. So I'll say the Cuban community was part of that because as you know, back after July 2021, the Castro regime they opened the borders through Nicaragua, which is another tyranny in the area. There was a bunch of like Cubans fleeing from Cuba through that way, and that's why you got so many Cubans now, not only in Kentucky but
Yeah.
in other areas in the United States.
Well, and Vladimir, Louisville has been a pretty progressive city.
Yes.
Even though Kentucky as a whole is a pretty red state, but we have some areas here, Louisville being one of those, that has been more. More in opposition, say, to President Trump's immigration policies and more
Hmm.
conservative immigration policies. But it seems like that might be changing. Do you think that the Cuban community here could eventually become a force strong enough to push the city of Louisville toward more free market policies and away from some of the socialistic thinking and ideas, woke ideologies that many believe have brought damage to our city, especially economically. I mean, going back to the aftermath of COVID
Hmm.
and the Breonna Taylor situation. What is this an opportunity for a strong conservative Cuban community to really impact our city in this way?
Well, actually, that's part of what happened yesterday too. We just funded the Cuban Conservative American
Yeah.
Cuban Conservative Cuban American Coalition.
Yeah.
So we are working with the local Republican Party and some other American folks to bring more the community toward this way because we know as a fact that of course some institutions here in town has been hosting and getting in touch with the Cuban official government, and I know as a fact that their plan was trying to bring more the Cuban community toward the Democrats' votes. But you know what? We're here to fight. We'll let that happen. So let's see what's going on with that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I guess this Cuban American Conservative Coalition. I'd like to talk a little bit. Can you hang with us through the break and
Sure.
stay with us for another segment? That was actually going to be the question I talked about in the next segment. But let's talk a little more about why that's so important that we have that and what some of the goals and the mission of that are. We're talking here with Vladimir Aguilar, host of the Cuban Show, and glad to have him with us. He's a good friend and has been since the beginning of Kentucky's Voice. And coming up later, we'll talk about Medicaid reforms. Helping or healing? I'm going to make a case for both. Coming up, don't go away on Kentucky's Voice. Jim Waters with you today. Stay with us.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
Jim Waters back with you here on this segment of Kentucky's Voice Radio and TV. You can catch us on TV this afternoon at 4 o'clock. I'm waving to all the folks who see us on TV. So we hope you'll make that part of your day as well. But we're here live 11 to noon each weekday here on Kentucky's Voice. This is a statewide media opportunity that we're analyzing and reporting news from a conservative, common sense, and when it matters, a Christian point of view. Of course, that always matters, doesn't it? But when it's in the story, like it was about the tornadoes, we are not shy about including that. We're also glad to have with us today a guest staying with us over the break here is Vladimir Aguilar. And Vladimir is the host of The Cuban Show. He's a conservative Cuban American, proud to be an American, and a great guy just on top of all that. So it makes it just that much better. But Vladimir, we appreciate you staying with us through the break. Let's talk for a moment about the job that this administration is doing. What are you hearing from the Cuban community? And what's your assessment of the Trump policies, not just on immigration, but on the economy, on tax reform? For example, the Senate, I believe yesterday, passed a law that would get rid of taxes on tips for servers. And I'm sure there's people in your community that will benefit from those types of policies. So some of this is going through a change. This is quite a change that we've been through in terms of addressing government waste, the waste of taxpayer dollars, and also some of the corruption that's gone on. There was a 4-star general retired who was convicted of corruption. So there's a lot of things happening. What's your view? Give us the short Cliff Notes view of Vladimir Aguilar's analysis of the Trump administration and what's happening in our country.
Well, there is a bunch of opinions between the Cuban community, which is are kind of like divide, because of course more people like me who got settled here a few years ago, who got business and all that, of course we are glad to have these new Trump policies, especially on the hospitality industry, which is a strong area on the Cuban business, because there is a bunch of people who got restaurants, cafeterias, and all of that. So now that people won't have taxes on their tips, which is pretty good. But in the other side, we got the newcomers, the newcomers Cubans, which are not that. They don't have that many benefits from the immigration policies, and I totally understand. Actually, I got a bunch of friends who lost their jobs because their work permits are canceled already. And I understand as a American citizen, but most as a Cuban citizen, that when you come over here, you come to make your way through a good future. But that's the only way to fix all the corruption we had in the system. I've been trying to explain to them a little bit. Actually, that's why the Cuban show, tried to explain to them, guys, this is the only way. We need to fix America. We need to fix it because it was broken.
Yeah. Is that message resonating? Is it working? Are you seeing that people are accepting that?
Well, some people don't like it, of course, but some people, they just understood what's happening. And I've been trying to work with other Cubans in the community to try to help these people, because there is always a way that you can make it through.
Right.
Sometimes disinformation is the most common thing that you're gonna confront in the community, because sometimes they well, I have no choice now to do whatever I want to do, and I try to talk to that people. No, you have choices. It doesn't mean because you still, trying to fix your status, you don't have any choices. This is America. There's ways on the laws that you can go through. Yeah. And that's basically my main goal.
So don't give up, right? Don't give up.
No.
Call Vladimir Aguilar. Reach out to him at the Cuban Show. He'll help you with that. Vladimir, do you see other migrant populations becoming more conservative? Perhaps they're discovering that what they were told about America by opponents of freedom by socialists.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
not actually the way it is, and depending on where they live, that the West is very different from the way they were told and the way versus the way things actually are. Have you noticed that?
Yes, actually, there's a few other fellas from the Hispanic community. I'll say like Mexicans. I've been talking to them. Some of those fellows, they've been here for a while. They are American citizens and all of that, and they understood that at the end of the day, their values are conservative. Because
Hmm.
when you bring issues like the abortion, when you bring issues of the new LGTB whatever agenda and all of that, they don't agree with those policies. So these people they've been trying to work with the Cubans also. Like, hey, we know what's going on because at the end of the day, we don't support those things.
Hmm. We're talking with Vladimir Aguilar, who's host of the Cuban Show, and you can catch him on all the social media platforms several times a week, and we hope you will and check out his show. It's really good, and he's a great guy too. But glad to have you with us today, Vladimir, for just a couple more minutes here. We have many on the left in this country, particularly young people, who are
Yes.
idealistic, but they're very uninformed about how
Yes.
socialism actually works. And this may go back to your point about education, and maybe it does, and that's certainly got to be a part of this, a big part of it. And that that he wasn't Uncle Stalin, but he was a murderous tyrant, Joseph Stalin, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yet they've lived here. These are young people who've grown up here, grown up in many times middle income, if not upper income families and wealthy families, and they've enjoyed the benefits of a capitalistic, relatively free society where they can express their disagreement, they can protest, and so I get the question is what's causing that? How can a young person that grows up in a wealthy home in America enjoying all the benefits of our society, even a middle class home compared to the rest of the world is a higher standard of living, much higher in many cases. But what's your thought about that?
Well, that's basically the result of that indoctrination on the educational system. When you see these young people, especially, and I deal a lot with a lot of them, um, they have no idea how in reality life work. Because of course they have their wealthy families who provide everything for them, so life is easy for them. But when I try to explain, I use my son as an example of that. I brought my son like 3 years ago from Cuba, straight from Cuba to here. Um, when he get to home, he told me like, "Hey, Dad, I wanna get a shower." I said, "Okay, yeah, go to the bathroom and take a shower." He didn't knew how the shower works.
Yeah,
Shower,
yeah,
simple thing like that.
yeah.
And I try to use that example to the young people here in America
Hmm.
because they take freedom and they take things for granted.
Hmm.
You know, and I'm trying to explain to them like, no, the ideology that they've been putting in your head or in the schools and universities and all of that is just a big lie. That as a rhetoric, as a semantic, that sounds perfect, but in real life is a lie.
Hmm.
That only brings more poverty, and you won't have like Cuba. They say, "Oh no, Cuba is a socialist paradise." I say, "Okay, so what do you think? Like more than 3 millions of Cubans left Cuba.
Hmm.
No one's want to leave paradise. I don't see like any American citizen jumping in raft going to Cuba."
Right, right,
And that's when you
right.
you bring to them the issue that they start to think about those things. And of course the educational system in America, like especially Harvard. I'll talk about Harvard right now. We got in Harvard. Trump is in a big fight right now with Harvard
Right.
because all the left-winger policy and
Hmm.
all of that. There is a teacher in Harvard. She's a Cuban teacher in Harvard. She has been preaching end to capitalism and to the America because the socialism is the only way. to survive. And that's a Cuban person who
Yeah.
also works with some American fellows
Hmm.
who preach the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and that's why it's such a tragedy that only 1 in 3 of our kids in Kentucky can read proficiently, and the numbers for low
Exactly.
income minorities are much lower because if you can't read, you're not going to be a critical thinker. You're not going to challenge
Yes.
the government. I think a lot of times what younger people, not just young people, but generally speaking, a lot of times it is, but a lot of people now who want to protest out in the Highlands the other day, they were protesting Israel and they were holding up the signs and they all look, like they were probably back from the 60s, the hippies age. But you can't do that. You couldn't do that in a socialist or communist country. You couldn't carry your sign
At
out
all.
there and honk and say honk if you're for this or that. You couldn't do it. There's not that freedom, and I don't think people realize that they couldn't
There
express
is there is
themselves.
hu- there is hundreds of Cubans in jail right now just to carry a sign or just for saying or chanting freedom, just for saying that.
Well, that's amazing. Hey, I have a really important question for you here as we close with Vladimir Aguilar, host of the Cuban Show. Don't miss it, and an all-around great guy, great conservative Cuban leader in our community. Where is the best Cuban sandwich in Louisville? We're gonna take this to the bank, brother. This has got to be right. You got to get this one right.
Well, I would say La Bodeguita de Mima in Nulu downtown has the best sandwich, the Cuban sandwich, not only from Kentucky, I'll say from the United States.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing more and more Cuban restaurants pop up. There's a great one out there in the Highlands, and I think they're related to the folks that run the downtown one. But you certainly can't go wrong, and I've enjoyed getting to know some of those folks as well. What's next for you, Vladimir Aguilar? What else are you going to do here? We got about 30 seconds.
Well, we
What's
just
next?
Well, next, we just opened the conservative coalition, so we're gonna start bringing the political lobby into the Cuban community because we escaped from a country like just talking about politics can lead you to jail. So we are trying to bring the community more in the political lobby.
Very good, Vladimir Aguilar. At the Cuban Show 502 at what was that, Gmail? I missed that. We had it up there, but it was on the screen. Anyhow, catch him on the Cuban Show. And Vladimir, thanks for joining us today. It is the Cuban Show 502 at gmail.com. Jim Waters, stay with us. We'll talk Medicaid reform next on Kentucky's Voice.
to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And Jim Waters with you here on the Wednesday edition of Kentucky's Voice. It's radio and TV. We should change that little promo there to say radio and TV because we're on at 4 o'clock this afternoon. You can watch this program on television at 4 p.m., but we're live on the radio, which I'm very glad about, being a radio guy that I am, and having the background in that I am, and we're just glad to have you with us. If you want to weigh in today at 502-571-0970, you can text us at that number if you have questions. Eventually, we'll get it set up, I think, where you can call us with your comments. But right now, we're doing the text thing, 502-571-0970. My thanks to Vladimir Aguilar. What a great interview and great guy he is, and great work he's doing here, right here in our city of Louisville. I'm going to talk in a moment about Medicaid and the reforms, and there's a big fight going on about what kind of reforms we need and what will be politically palatable. And like it or not, that's always part of the equation, whether it can pass. You know, politicians don't want to usually take the risk if it's not going to be worth it, and I get that, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. But this is from Fox News, and I just thought this. I'm sorry, this is from the Tampa Free Press, but it was a Fox News guest who said Sunday that Democratic New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez abruptly walked out during a Bronx town hall rather than answer tough questions about crime and quality of life in her district. During an appearance on Fox and Friends Sunday, Fox News guest Guadalupe Alvarez recalled confronting Ocasio-Cortez at a Bronx town hall with concerns about Jackson Heights, only to be dismissed mid-question and left without a response. Alvarez, a constituent in AOC's district, said she felt brushed off after attending the event to raise urgent concerns about crime in that district. She said, I went to one of the town halls where she was speaking in the Bronx, I believe, and when I asked the question of, what are you doing for Jackson Heights? How are you aware of the crime and prostitution? Have you seen the neighborhood lately? She dismissed me. She said she'd be right back and never came back and just handed the floor to her assistant. Which was really infuriating, Alvarez said. The guest also alleged that the event was tightly controlled, and this is what I would get to as well, with attendees given pre-written questions. Not only that, she said we were given questions written by them. So it's like our concerns weren't really addressed until like someone had to speak up, and I had to be that person, and she still does nothing, Alvarez said. So we aren't being heard no matter how much we go out there. There's no accountability on her part. So the National Democratic Committees have launched a nationwide People's Town Halls tour, this is from the article still, aiming to reconnect with voters after suffering major losses in the 2024 elections. Other Democratic leaders have launched their own tours across the U.S., including Ocasio-Cortez, who joined independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders on his, quote, fighting oligarchy, quote, end quote, tour, while they fly around in private jets all over the country. You got to love the irony. What a rich irony that is. But back to this article from Tampa. As Ocasio-Cortez campaigns nationwide, pushing left-wing policies, violent crime in her own Queens and Bronx district has surged by 70% since she took office. New York Police Department data shows some precincts, like the 110th in Queens, have seen crime more than double, jumping 105% during her watch. Ocasio-Cortez has also drawn scrutiny for her rhetoric on immigration. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem told Fox News it's, quote, entirely appropriate, end quote, for the DOJ to investigate her remarks to illegal migrants after she publicly confronted border czar Tom Homan at a Jackson Heights town hall. In February, she hosted a virtual event titled, quote, Know Your Rights with ICE, where she advised illegal immigrants on how to respond during encounters with immigration agents at home or work. But, you know, what bothers me most about this scenario here, of course, it bothers me that it's the hypocrisy. It's the daily hypocrisy that we see from both sides and sometimes, but a lot of times from the left. Let's just face it, because here you've got the Fighting Oligarchy tour, and they're fighting oligarchy by flying around on private jets that only the oligarchs could afford. I mean, you got to love that. But the other thing I'm really concerned about here is that they went to this event that it's supposed to be people's town halls. It's supposed to be, it's been marketed as aiming to reconnect with voters after the tremendous losses that the Dems suffered in November. And yet here they are they're given pre-written questions. The attendees are given pre-written questions. They can't ask their own questions. They can't express their own concerns. I mean, what's the point of having this? It's all very staged. And I will say this about Trump: like him, love him, hate him, love him, doesn't matter. He doesn't do that kind of stuff. He'll stay and answer the questions. You might not like the answers. You might not agree with the answers, but you don't find this kind of nonsense going on. And then when a question is asked, an independent question by a constituent, the representative walks out because it's too hard. Frankly, she doesn't want to answer it. She doesn't have an answer to it. She doesn't have an answer because her sights are set on ideology. And when it comes to things like fighting crime, crime has increased in my district. But she has no answers about it. She hasn't thought about it because her thinking's all about how can I push this ideology, this left-wing nonsense, a whole lot of nonsense. And, look, it's also an indication of insecurity, because if I have the answers, or if I at least have an answer, I'm not going to be afraid, or I'm not going to be hesitant about giving that answer. I'm going to want people to know where I stand and what I believe. And excuse me, folks. I think it's the Ohio Valley allergies here today, but if I'm confident in where I stand in my positions, then I'm not going to walk out. I'm going to make my case. Now, you might not agree. We might not agree, but it's unacceptable to walk out on a constituent. That's unacceptable, especially when it's a question about crime, because if anything, I think our public servants are tasked with doing all they can to deal with these issues of crime. And this just shows they can't do it. They're not very good at it. The policies aren't working. I mean, when you have crime increasing by 105%, what's that all about? That's a pretty good indication that your policies are not working. Now, from the Bronx to the Louisville Forum held, I was a panelist there, a debate. I debated last week at the Louisville Forum, and the issue was Medicaid. And, of course, there's a lot of debate going on about Medicaid in Washington. President Trump and his administration are trying to figure out how they can pay for some cuts to our spending. And, of course, Medicaid is, you can't talk about real serious cuts in spending without talking about some of these benefit programs. You just can't do it. It's not possible because there's not enough discretionary spending to cut and make the kinds of cuts. We cannot make the kinds of cuts only in discretionary spending. And some of these programs, like Medicaid, and I will say this here. Let's say this about Medicaid, because I'm not going to have enough time to talk about everything I wanted to today, but Medicaid was created for a relatively small group of Americans. Medicaid was not meant to provide health insurance and coverage and care for millions and millions of Americans. It certainly was not intended to cover 1 in 3 Kentuckians. We have almost 1.5 million Kentuckians that are receiving Medicaid benefits. That is not the purpose of the original purpose of this program. It was a safety net to provide a safety net for those who were truly indigent, truly disabled, and could not work, or those who were temporarily out of work. It was never meant to be a year's long. In fact, even more than a year, even that long. It wasn't meant to provide people those kinds of benefits for that long a period of time. And yet we've had people on Medicaid for years now in this state. So one of the proposals that's been offered at both the national, the federal, and the state level, and it was actually passed in legislation this year in Kentucky, was work requirements. And this would require recipients of Medicaid benefits paid for by the taxpayers. This would require that they work or look for work or do something that they could count toward doing something if they wanted to continue to receive Medicaid benefits. This is entirely reasonable. Is it going to hurt? Yeah, it's going to hurt folks who've been used to collecting a check without working. And then, the other side, Emily Beauregard, who is with Kentucky Voices for Health. I think I have that right. I'm going from memory because I didn't have that in front of me, but she was my opponent at this debate. I think I have the name of the organization, Kentucky Voices for Health. But, she was talking about how, most people now, 98% of Kentuckians who receive Medicaid are already working. Well, then what's the problem? Why such an opposition? Why such an outcry to this policy that thank goodness our legislators put in? They did it at the last minute in a bill. I don't like those kind of legislative techniques, but I do like the idea that there's a work requirement in order to receive benefits, because I don't think we're helping people by giving them benefits without requiring some accountability for their own individual responsibility, their own individual selves. That is not to say that there are not people who do need these benefits, and there are. And let me make that clear. I believe that there are people who absolutely we should be providing these benefits for. But that raises one final point I'll talk about today. Maybe we'll talk about this more on Friday. But when you use resources of government, when you use taxpayer dollars for one thing, that removes the ability for those resources to be used for something else. Because I have a newsflash for all those on the left, for the Kentucky Voices for Health, for all those who argued against some accountability here. Resources are not limited. There is not an automated taxpayer machine in the Capitol in Frankfurt. I promise you, I've been there many times. It's not there. We need responsible policy on this, and I think our legislature has tried to do that. Thanks for joining us today here on Kentucky's Voice. Hope you have a great Wednesday. We'll see you again Friday. Stay with us every day.